This sweep is not shocking because of the winner of the series. It's that the Nets never got a dub in it. The Celtics, from start to finish, closed better, closed at an elite level. Game 1, remember, was the Kyrie 39-point game, and the Celtics got 2 buckets on the final 2 possessions and a stop in between. They closed on the final 3 possessions. Game 2, fourth quarter, Kevin Durant was nowhere to be found. It was all Jason Tatum. Game 3, again, Kevin Durant, nowhere to be found. The Celtics as a team were phenomenal. Last night, every time the Nets tried to claw their way back with a run, the Celtics had the answer. And you heard KD mention one of the late possessions, and you also heard that call, the late free throw miss. But I'm going to go back earlier than that, than 30 seconds to play. I want to go back to 2 minutes to play, okay? It's a 109-106 game. Celtics lead by 3 with 2 minutes to play. The Nets had just gotten the Celtics rebound off of a miss. And so here they come back down the floor. They have momentum. The Barclays Center crowd is rising to their feet. They can sense this is a moment. Again, 1 possession down. And Kyrie takes the ball off the dribble, tries to slice through the lane and beat 3 different Celtics defenders. There's nowhere to go, and he still forces the shot in the lane. It falls wide, no good, Celtics rebound. That, to me, was the defining moment because it spoke to all of the ills of this Brooklyn Nets team, and that play and that decision would not happen on the flip side of the Celtics. The Celtics were supremely coached in this series. They played as a team. They got big contributions from guys not named Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown was excellent. Marcus Smart, a couple of huge buckets. Al Horford, coming back to Boston, had a couple of big moments in this series as well. But Jason Tatum also, I thought, grew into a super-duper star in front of our very eyes. Jason Tatum showed throughout this series that on his best day, you can lump him in with the 5 to 10 greatest players of the NBA. He is right now in that category, and he's not going anywhere because he's 25 years old. On the flip side, as often as Jason Tatum played like a top 10, top 5 player in the NBA, Kyrie and Kevin Durant did not. And you can say that Tatum's defense and Kevin Durant was exemplary, and the Celtics defense all season long was amazing, and it was. And the Celtics defense had a lot of reason why Kevin Durant was off in this series. But man, KD, this is why you're considered one of the best players of the NBA. This is why some people thought, as LeBron comes down off his perch, that Kevin Durant's now the best player of the NBA. These are your moments. These have to be your moments. If you're the best player in the NBA, you can't get swept. You just can't. And it was indicative of a season where the Nets never played together literally because they were not on the same floor at the same time. But also, they weren't unified as a team. They did not play, I mentioned this with the Lakers, they never played with a joy that comes with a unity, a continuity. We're in this thing together. I'm here to pick you up. Think about all of the chapters of this Nets season. Kyrie not playing at all. Doesn't want to get vaxxed, and the Nets say you can't be a part-time guy. Kevin Durant missing 6 weeks due to injury. Kyrie eventually coming back as a part-time guy. That upsetting James Harden. Harden wanting to get traded. Harden eventually getting traded to get Ben Simmons in return, who never plays. In the postseason, they finally get Kevin Durant and Kyrie back. But can Simmons play? Will Simmons play? Is Simmons healthy? Is he not? This whole thing. holding over the Nets. They just never, it was a heavy season. They can never escape that weight of the season and failure to rise up to expectations. And yes, you can blame Kevin Durant. And yes, you can blame Kyrie Irving, because as great of a team as the Celtics are, the Nets have no business getting swept if those two guys step up. And after Kyrie's 39-point outburst in Game 1, where was he? Where was he? This was a team that was built on the backs of three incredibly sensitive, mercurial, and unpredictable personalities. Durant, Kyrie, and Harden. And banking on those guys to carry you through adversity? Bad idea. And the Celtics were phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And the fact that Ben Simmons could have come back from Game 4, that not only didn't come back for Game 4, but wasn't even in the arena. According to reports, it might have been back issues. So you're good enough to sit on the sidelines for the entire series, except the game you're supposed to come back, and then you can't even be in the arena? That was always so bizarre, the Simmons thing. And, again, a metaphor for the Nets season. Kyrie in Game 1 fighting the Celtics crowd. The Nets were punching at air all season. Celtics are moving on, and Celtics-Bucks, if we get Celtics-Bucks, is going to be phenomenal. Celtics can win an NBA championship. I am convinced. That defense is so legit, and Tatum has grown into, as I said, an elite player that you can hang on in big moments, and he's going to get the job done. All right, here's your phone number, 855-212-4CBS. Or on Twitter, DA on CBS. As we know, Mraz, huge Nets fan. Mraz also, after Game 1, had predicted on Twitter, Nets in 6. So where are you mentally today, big boy?
Frustrated, upset, but understanding, because the Celtics were clearly the better team. And on Game 82 on that final Sunday, the Bucks said, we want no part of the Nets, and the Celtics said, bring it on. They deserve all the credit in the world. I think they are going to an NBA Finals, and the Nets have some serious work to figure out this offseason.
What'd you think? What'd you make of Simmons not even being in the building yesterday?
He couldn't anymore. He could no longer show his face on that bench, and I don't know how he shows his face in the locker room. You can no longer sit there and stick out like a sore thumb wanting to be seen in all your garb and Louis Vuitton sweaters, and then boom, that was it. Once you could not play, the fans would have crushed him last night and heckled him and screamed everything at him, because it's now become a joke that he couldn't even find a way to muster 10 to 12 minutes off the bench, but yet wanted to be seen in all his garish freaking lamb suits. I couldn't take it anymore. Get lost.
How does that happen where he's targeted to come back for Game 4, then suddenly it just gets scratched? I mean, what happens there?
Well, first of all, the real question is, who leaked that he'd be ready for Game 4? Was it Ben Simmons' camp, or was it the Nets' camp trying to push him along to come? Because if it was the Nets and then Ben Simmons pushed back, that's an issue. If it was Ben Simmons' camp and then basically it got to, he maybe thought the Nets would win Game 3, and then there was that wild stat thrown out that if Ben Simmons had played in Game 4, he'd become the first player in NBA history to play back-to-back games and have their team eliminated in both. So I don't think this had anything to do with the back. I think that he knew even if playing, he was not going to be any elite form. But rather than try to gut it out and have anybody think that, he was giving it his all, he would rather just not deal with any criticism and say, I'm done with this. Come get me next year, which is the absolute wrong attitude to have as a professional athlete.
How does Kyrie go from dropping 39 in Game 1 to barely making a peep in the next 3 games?
Honestly, DA, a lot was made in this series. I can't imagine going out and playing 42 minutes of a 48-minute game where you've eaten and drinking nothing all day. All day. And, he was obviously...
he was fasting for Ramadan.
Yeah, he was fasting for Ramadan, which is obviously that's your religious belief to do that. But I believe that had to take a toll on him. There was no secret that the day game where he would wake up with more energy, he had obviously the best effort. And at night, he just looked like he was dragging. It's very difficult to go do that at an elite level, and I really think that took its toll on him.
It's an interesting theory that has not been talked about, I think, of the national broadcast side of things, because that's what's being talked about amongst net circles.
Yes.
That
Yes.
The one-day game that Kyrie played, he was excellent. The other 3 night games is when he was barely a blip on the radar.
Right, because in theory, he's waking up with more energy, and by the time you get to nighttime and the game's tipping off before sundown, you're drained. You have nothing left, at least to perform at an elite high physical level. To me, I don't know how that doesn't add up at that point.
What about after the game? Kyrie saying, I want to be here, and me and Kevin will have to work with Joe and Sean to build the team, being owner Joe Tsai and GM Sean Marks. A, not mentioning Steve Nash, but B, like that's Kyrie Irving's job to help build the roster and the team? What's going on with this guy?
On one hand, I appreciate the honesty because I do believe that this is happening with superstars all over the league. But on the other hand, it is just so insulting to say in real time because if you guys have been doing this all along, clearly it hasn't worked to this point as we will enter year 3 of them really playing together because year 1 doesn't count with KD's injury. But, yeah, you can't be saying that. And then it takes Kevin Durant as the one to say, no, of course we want Nash back, where Kyrie is basically paying him no mind. It's just shut up. Just shut up and we'll hear from you in October.
I don't know what it would be like to be a Nets fan because they must have been the most aggravating team. It must have been the most stressful, aggravating kind of there was no joy in rooting for the Nets this year. It was just kind of all headache.
Well, and that's the problem, DA, with the elimination is that you're just waiting because with this team, they don't care about the regular season, so it's hard for the fans to invest everything in the regular season. And then basically you're just watching now to only get back to April because whatever happens in the regular season next year is not going to matter. Ultimately, they're going to be defined by this. And then you're forced into a position where the rest of America seemingly hates these guys, but every fan base would still root for them if they were on their team. So now you're just in this spot where you're defending guys you don't want to defend, but you have to because they're your team. It's just the whole thing sucks. It just sucks. And now we just got to get to next April and just cross our fingers and hope for the best. The Celtics were a bad matchup for them. They were a bad matchup all season. The Celtics knew this, and that's why they went for it, obviously, in Game 82 and said, we don't care, bring on the Nets. And I did say that the Celtics and Bucks were the 2 teams I didn't want to see. I wanted to see the Sixers or Heat. And you got to give the Celtics credit, man. They are the better team, and the Nets have some serious work to do.
For what it's worth, as much of a putz as Ben Simmons is, doesn't look like you'd want James Harden on the floor either. I mean,
No.
James Harden's completely MIA in Philadelphia as well.
Right. Embiid's shooting hand is messed up. You think Harden can pick up the slack? Absolutely not. And he'll show up fat next year anyway. But
The best player in that trade was Seth Curry.
Absolutely. I love Seth Curry. And by the way, on that note, with Seth Curry shooting threes, I guess it is a shoot. Nets ended up missing Joe Harris more than they thought, too, because he was really the third wheel on that team, and he's been out since November.
Yep. Never really played. I think Joe Harris had like 14 games the entire season played.